The sun rose slow over the high hills, shining pale gold across the kingdom of Elendria. The light touched the towers of the royal palace where Queen Althea Vale stood on her balcony. She watched the morning fog rise from the valley below. Everything looked quiet and peaceful, but her heart was uneasy. For many nights, she had felt a shadow behind the calm. She did not know why, but something deep inside told her that the peace of her land would not last. Down in the courtyard, guards trained with swords while servants rushed about their work. The sound of steel rang through the air. From another balcony, Princess Alara watched them with interest. She was young and full of life, her spirit strong and bright like her mother's when she was young. She often told the queen that she wanted to learn to fight, but her mother always smiled and said that Alara's heart was made for healing, not battle. That morning seemed like any other. Birds circled the banners. Horses were fed, and the cooks began to prepare the royal breakfast. But beyond the palace walls, far among the mountains, smoke began to rise. None in the castle saw it yet. A plan was moving quietly in the dark corners of the realm. Many had grown jealous of the queen's long rule. Some whispered that it was time for change, and where words of greed gather, danger is never far away. By noon, Queen Althea sat in the great hall beside her daughter. Messengers came and went, bringing reports from the borders. One spoke of unrest in the north, another told of missing patrols. The queen's calm face did not change, but her hands tightened around the arms of her throne. Alara looked at her mother with worry. "Mother," Alara said softly, "do you think the kingdom is safe?" The queen turned to her and tried to smile. "Safety is never promised, my dear. But hope remains as long as we believe in it." Her voice trembled just slightly, and that small tremor frightened Alara more than any army could have. That night, the queen held a small council. Trusted advisors stood around the long table, maps spread before them. The flicker of torches threw long shadows down the walls. Captain Ward, a man loyal to the crown since youth, bowed to the queen. "My queen," he said, "there are rumors of traitors among the guards. We should move the princess to safety." The queen looked at him sharply. "You think this rebellion runs so deep?" Ward hesitated. "I fear it might." The queen stood silent for a long time. Her gaze moved toward the tall windows where the moon shone cold and white. "Very well," she said at last. "At dawn we prepare the royal convoy. Alara will travel under guard to the mountain retreat until this is ended." Outside, the wind began to howl. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded 3 sharp blasts. The council froze. Those were not the signals of any friendly patrol. A guard burst through the doors, face pale. "My queen, the gates are under attack." The great hall erupted into motion. Ward drew his sword. The queen rose, her voice ringing through the hall. "Protect the princess." Alara was hurried through narrow corridors by guards in shining armor. The night burned red beyond the windows. Fire climbed the distant towers. The air filled with smoke and shouts. Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to stay by her mother's side, but the guards pulled her onward. When they reached the courtyard, chaos ruled. Soldiers fought in the torchlight. The sound of battle roared like thunder. Horses screamed. One guard lifted Alara onto a horse. "Ride, my lady," shouted. "Do not look back." Alara turned once more toward the palace where her mother fought to hold the throne. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she kicked the horse and rode hard through the gates. The wind tore through her hair. Behind her, the walls of her home blazed against the night sky. Far above, Queen Althea stood on the steps of her throne room, sword in hand. Soldiers surrounded her. Her white gown was marked with smoke and ash. "Hold the line," she called. Her voice carried strength born of love. Yet deep down, fear gripped her heart. Would her daughter escape? Would she ever see her again? The battle lasted till dawn. When the first light broke, the palace was half in ruins, and the queen stood alone among the fallen. Her guards were gone, and her enemies closed in. She raised her sword one last time, even as tears burned her eyes. Somewhere beyond the hills, her daughter was fleeing into the unknown. The queen lifted her face to the sky and whispered a silent prayer. "Come back to me." The smoke of war rose higher, swallowing the morning sun, and the once bright kingdom fell into shadow. The sky was heavy with clouds when Alara and Ethan reached the outer lands of Elendria. The air smelled of smoke and ash. Fields that once grew golden wheat now lay dark and burned. Houses stood empty, windows broken, doors hanging loose. The war had passed through here and left only silence behind. Lara felt her chest tighten, remembered how these lands once sang with life. Farmers had waved to her and her mother when the royal carriages rode by. Now only the wind moved through the ruins. Ethan walked carefully, his hand never far from his sword. "They've come this far," he said in a low voice. "Hey, the rebels must hold the capital. They'll have soldiers everywhere." Ilara looked toward the distant hills. Beyond them lay her home, or what was left of it. "We have to reach the city," she said. "My mother is alive, she's still there." They moved mostly at night, hiding by day in caves and in the shadows of broken barns. Once they met a group of frightened villagers who offered them bread. The villagers whispered that the queen was still alive, kept prisoner by the rebel general who had taken the palace. Hearing that gave Ilara new courage. After many days they reached the edge of the capital. The once bright city was surrounded by walls blackened by fire. The gates were guarded by men in dark armor. Torches burned along the towers, their flames small against the vast night. Ethan studied the walls from the cover of a rocky ridge. "We can't go through the gate," he said.
"Right.
"But I know of an old passage that might still be open. My father once worked at the royal forge. He told me there were tunnels beneath the city." Ilara looked at him, hope lighting her eyes. "Take me there," she said. They waited until the night grew thick, then crossed the empty fields that surrounded the walls. The cold wind whispered through the grass. Ilara's heart beat fast as they reached an old stone, well half hidden behind a fallen house. Ethan cleared away the dirt and lifted a round piece of metal that covered the entrance to a tunnel. The smell of damp earth rose up. "It leads under the palace," he said. "But it's dark and narrow. Stay close to me." They climbed down carefully. The tunnel smelled of soil and time. Their footsteps echoed softly as they walked by the light of a small lantern. For hours they moved through the cold dark, following the winding path, until at last they reached a small iron door. Ethan pressed his ear to it. Faint sounds came from the other side, a soldier's voice, the clank of armor, a door closing. They waited until the noise faded, then Ethan pushed the door open. They entered a storage room deep beneath the palace. Dust covered everything. The air was still and old. Ilara felt her throat tighten. Above them somewhere her mother was imprisoned. Ethan found a staircase leading upward. They moved slowly, avoiding the guards. The palace was quiet, but it no longer felt like home. The golden walls were dark with soot. Banners bearing the royal crest had been torn down. In their place hung new flags, rough and red. At last they reached the corridor outside the throne room, then held up a hand to stop her. He peered around the corner. Only 2 soldiers stood guard. He moved like a shadow, quick and silent. A moment later, the guards lay still, disarmed, but alive. Ilara's heart pounded as they stepped into the great hall. The vast room lay in ruins. Dust floated through the air. The tall windows were cracked, and moonlight spilled through them. And there, at the far end of the hall, the queen sat bound upon the throne that had once made her the ruler of all Elindria. Mother Ilara whispered, tears rising in her eyes. Leah lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale but proud. "Lara," she breathed. "Is it truly you?" Lara ran forward, falling to her knees beside the throne. "I came back," she said, her voice shaking. "You told me never to give up hope, and I didn't." The queen's eyes glittered with tears. "You were your father's courage in my heart," she said softly. Before they could speak more, hurried steps echoed through the corridor. A group of soldiers entered, led by a tall man with cruel eyes. "So the lost princess returns," he said, drawing his sword. Ethan stepped in front of Ilara, his blade ready, the air filled with tension. The clash came quick and hard. Steel met steel, each strike echoing across the stone walls. Ilara rushed to free her mother while the men fought. Ethan moved with the strength of a born warrior, each swing brave and sure. Finally, he struck the rebel's sword aside and knocked him to the ground. The man scrambled up, but before he could attack again, Ilara stepped forward with the queen's old scepter in hand. Her voice rang clear. "This is the queen's hall, and her reign has not ended," she shouted. The sound filled the chamber. The guards froze. The rebel leader hesitated, then fled down the corridor. The remaining men dropped their weapons. Ethan turned to Alara, breathing hard. The queen was free. Lara threw her arms around her mother, laughing and crying all at once. "You came back to me," the queen whispered. "Told you I would," Alara said, holding her close. Outside, the dawn was breaking. The light touched the broken throne, turning it gold once more. The rebellion was not yet over, but hope had returned to Elindria. Ilara woke to the sound of rushing water. Her body ached all over and her head throbbed like a drum. She did not know how long she had been lying there. The sky above her was cloudy and gray. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy. Slowly, she turned her head and saw a small cottage nearby, built beside a river that shone faintly in the morning light. A young man came out from the cottage carrying a wooden bucket. He stopped short when he saw her awake. His clothes were simple, and his hands were rough from work at the forge. His dark hair hung over his brow, and his eyes showed worry but also calm strength. "You're awake," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Ilara blinked and tried to sit up. Her arm was wrapped in bandages. Where am I?" she asked, her voice weak. "You're outside the small village of Rindal," the man said, setting the bucket down. "My name is Ethan Cole. I found you near the river 2 days ago. You were hurt and half drowned." She looked confused.
Oh.
The last thing she remembered was riding through fire and smoke. The palace, her mother, the shout-sit, all came back in flashes that made her heart race. She tried to stand, but Ethan gently pushed her shoulder down. "Easy," he said. "You've lost a lot of strength. Rest first. Whatever happened, it's behind you now." He carried her inside the cottage. It was small, but warm. A fire burned gently in the fireplace, filling the room with soft light. The smell of baked bread mixed with the scent of wood smoke. On a table lay pieces of iron, half-made tools, and simple metal ornaments. Ethan helped her drink water and gave her a little soup. "I owe you my life," Ilara said after a while. Ethan smiled a little. "You do not owe me anything. I only did what anyone would do." But deep down, Ilara knew that few people would risk themselves for a stranger. The river where he found her was wild and cold, and the forest nearby was filled with thieves from the rebellion. He had saved her at great risk. For days she stayed there, healing slowly. Ethan told her stories about the village, about the hard winters and good summers, about the forge his father had built long ago. He worked from dawn until evening, shaping metal with quiet skill. When he struck the hammer on the anvil, she watched the sparks fly like stars in the dark. Ilara said little at first. She feared to tell him who she truly was, for she did not know whom she could trust. If the rebels found her, they would use her against her mother. So she told him only that her name was Lara, and that her home had been lost in the war. Ethan did not press her for more. He had seen enough sorrow in his life to know when to let silence heal. Each evening, they shared a simple meal and spoke about small things. Ilara began to laugh again, a sound she had not made since before the flames at the palace. One rainy night she asked him, "Have you ever wanted to leave this place?" Ethan looked at the fire for a long time. "When my father lived, we dreamed of it," he said. "Wanted me to become a knight. But when he died, I stayed to keep the forge running. The world outside has no welcome for nameless men." Ilara looked at him, seeing in him not a nameless man but one braver than many nobles she had known. "Names do not give honor," she said softly. "Deeds do." He met her gaze and smiled, and for a moment the storm outside seemed far away. Weeks passed. Ilara regained her strength. She helped Ethan around the cottage, carrying water, polishing tools, repairing clothes. Sometimes they walked to the edge of the river, where birds darted between the trees, and the smell of earth after rain filled the air. Yet peace could not last forever. One day, as Ethan was working the forge, they heard distant hoofbeats. The sound echoed through the forest. Ethan set down his hammer and frowned. "No traders come this way during the wet season," he said. Ilara's heart skipped. She peered out the small window and saw riders moving quickly along the pathmen in dark armor bearing the rebel mark. "They are searching," she whispered. "They will find me." Ethan turned to her. "You cannot stay here. They will come for the village next." Fear gripped her, but she also felt a strange calm. "Then I must keep moving," she said. "I must find my mother. I must go home." Ethan nodded. "Then I go with you," he said simply. "You owe me nothing," she said. He looked at her firmly. "No," he replied. "But I cannot stand aside while good people are lost in this war." Before sunrise the next day, Ethan packed what little he had bred, a cloak and a small blade. Ilara dressed in a plain villager's cloak, her royal jewels hidden deep in the earth beneath the forge. Together they stepped into the misty dawn, leaving behind the little cottage by the river. The road ahead would be long, but Ilara felt strength return to her spirit. She was no longer the frightened girl who had fled the palace that night. Beside her walked a man who had saved her not once but forever. Together they began the journey toward hope. The road through the forest was long and quiet. Trees rose high on both sides, their branches heavy with green leaves that blocked most of the sunlight. Lara and Ethan walked side by side, their footsteps soft on the damp path. The world smelled of morning dew and earth. Every sound made Ilara turn, still fearing the rebels might be close behind. Ethan walked with calm eyes, his hand never far from the small blade at his side. They spoke little for the first few days. Ilara's thoughts were heavy with her mother and her kingdom. The memory of the burning palace haunted her dreams. Each night, when they rested by a small fire, she saw the flames and heard the cries again. Ethan would wake when she did. He would not ask questions, only hand her a cup of water and keep watch until she slept once more. On the third day, they reached the hills beyond the forest. From there, Ilara could see the distant plains stretching out like a sea of gold. The wind was strong and carried the smell of rain. A small village waited at the foot of the hills, smoke rising gently from chimneys. "We should stop there," Ethan said. "We can rest, buy food, and perhaps hear news." Ilara nodded. She tried to walk with confidence, but her heart beat fast. She feared what she might learn. If her mother was gone, she had no reason to return. But deep inside she felt a spark of hope that would not die. The village was small and peaceful. Farmers sold fruit in baskets. Children ran through the muddy street, laughing as dogs chased them. Ethan traded one of his metal tools for bread and cheese. The old woman at the stall glanced at Ilara's fine posture and strange eyes. "You don't look like a farmer's daughter," the woman said kindly. Ilara smiled. "I am only a traveler now," she said. They ate quietly beside a well. Ethan looked around and said, "We can stay at the inn tonight. Tomorrow we will follow the river south. The rebels guard the main road, so we must move carefully." Ilara nodded. She trusted him more with each passing day. His patience gave her courage. The way he spoke and moved made her believe that the world could still be kind, even after all it had taken away. As night fell, they entered the small inn. A few travelers sat near the fire, talking in low voices. The air smelled of smoke and stew. Innkeeper, a thin man with tired eyes, gave them a small room upstairs. Later, as the rain pattered on the roof, Ilara lay awake. She thought about her mother again, standing tall in the throne room, surrounded by fire. She wondered if the queen had survived that night. The thought of her captured or dead filled her with dread. Ethan sat near the window, his knife in hand as he cleaned the blade. Her voice broke the silence. "Ethan, why did you help me that day by the river?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "When I saw you lying there, I saw someone who had lost everything. I have lost too. I could not leave you behind." His words were simple, but they touched her deeply. She smiled faintly. "You risked your life for a stranger. Not a stranger anymore," he said, his eyes gentle. Days turned into weeks as they continued south. They crossed small streams, climbed stony paths, and slept under open skies. Along the way, they met people who whispered news of battles far away. The rebellion had taken most of the cities. Many said the queen was still alive, but imprisoned in her own palace. The rebels called her rule finished, yet the people still spoke her name with respect and sorrow. Hearing that, Ilara's heart filled with renewed strength. "She lives. I must reach her," she said. Ethan agreed. "We will find a way inside," he told her. "But first, you must learn to defend yourself. The road will not be safe." Under his guidance, she began to train. Each evening, he showed her how to hold a blade, how to move with balance, how to stay calm, even when fear gripped her. At first she stumbled often, her hands blistered and her arms ached, but she refused to give up. Little by little, her strikes grew strong and sure. "You learn fast," Ethan said one night, wiping sweat from his brow. I have a good teacher, she answered with a shy smile. They set up camp near a quiet lake. The stars mirrored on the water like silver lights. Alara sat beside him and watched the reflections tremble. When I was small, she said, my mother told me that the stars are the tears of those who never stop hoping. Ethan looked up at the sky. And hope has its own light, he said softly. The bond between them grew in these quiet moments. Though neither spoke the word love, it hid in their voices and glances.
Oh.
When dawn came, they packed their things and continued toward Elendria. The fields turned to rocky valleys, and the sound of war echoed faintly in the distance. Alara wrapped her cloak tightly around her and faced the road ahead. The time for hiding was ending. She was no longer only a princess in exile. She was a woman determined to save her mother and her home. Ethan walked beside her, his face steady and kind, ready to face whatever awaited them beyond the hills. The first light of morning touched the palace walls. The smell of smoke still lay in the air, but the fighting had stopped. Birds began to sing, timid but steady, as if the world dared to breathe again. Alara stood on the balcony outside the throne room, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Behind her, Queen Althea sat weak, but alive, her eyes watching her daughter with both pride and sorrow. Ethan stood near the doorway, his sword still stained and scratched. His arm was bandaged, yet he looked calm. The fear that had filled the palace only hours before was now fading. Round them, loyal guards began to return. Many had hidden when the rebellion began, but had waited for the right moment to rise. They knelt before their queen, tears in their eyes, unable to believe she still lived. Alara turned toward her mother. It is over now, she said quietly. The rebels have fled. The queen reached out a trembling hand. Alara knelt beside her and took it gently. No, my child, the queen said softly. It is not over until we build again. A kingdom is not healed by victory alone. It is healed by mercy. Ethan stepped forward. Your words are true, my queen. I have seen what anger does to people. It burns everything. The queen gave him a small, kind smile. And who are you, brave man, who guarded my daughter through storm and fire? Ethan bowed. My name is Ethan Cole. I am only a blacksmith from a small village. I found the princess when she was lost. The queen studied him for a long time. Only a blacksmith, you say? You are a man of rare courage. Alara looked at him with quiet warmth. He saved me when I had no hope, she said. Without him I would not be here. The queen nodded. And he saved us both. She turned to her guards. That all who remain loyal are shown kindness. The ones who turned against us must face justice, but let there be no more blood than needed. For the first time in months, peace began to breathe inside the palace. Smoke was cleared, the fallen were laid to rest, and the banners of Elendria were raised again. People from the villages came with food and flowers to welcome back their queen. The news spread quickly that the rightful ruler had returned. Bells rang in distant towns. Children ran along the streets, shouting that the queen and princess yet lived. Days turned into weeks. The palace was repaired stone by stone. Alara helped the workers, refusing to hide behind walls and titles. She wanted her people to see her not as a princess trapped in gold, but as one of them. Ethan worked beside her, shaping iron for gates and weapons, his hands steady, his heart humble. Often, they would stand by the high windows at night, watching the stars above the reborn city. Alara would speak softly then, her voice thoughtful. When all this began, I thought bravery meant never being afraid. But now I see it as something else. It means walking forward, even when you are. Ethan looked at her with quiet pride. And you did. You walked through fear and came out stronger. One evening, Queen Althea called them both to the great hall. Candles burned along the white walls. The queen wore a plain gown, her crown resting beside her, not upon her head. She looked at them both with love. My daughter, she said, you have grown beyond even my own courage. You brought me back from despair. And you, Ethan, showed honor that no title can give. What reward could be worthy of what you have done? Ethan shook his head. I need no reward, my queen. I only wish for peace across the land. The queen smiled gently. Then peace shall be your reward. And if the future ever doubts the strength of our people, it will remember this night. Alara moved to her mother's side. Her eyes shone like morning. "We will keep your promise," she said. Later that night, when the palace had grown quiet and the voices of celebration echoed faintly in the courtyard, Alara and Ethan walked to the balcony. The city lights flickered below like fireflies. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. "Do you think the world will ever be calm again?" Alara asked. "Maybe not calm," Ethan said, "but kinder, perhaps. And kinder is enough." She smiled, the lines of worry on her face softening. "Mother used to say that people should never stop hoping. And she was right," he answered. "Hope brought you home." Alara turned her eyes toward the horizon. The sky glowed faint pink as the sun rose higher, washing away the last of the night. The queen stood behind them, watching silently, tears shining on her cheeks. "Mother, I'm home," Alara said. Her words carried softly through the air. The queen stepped forward and embraced her. "He saved me," Alara whispered again, looking toward Ethan. The queen's arms tightened. "Then we owe him a debt that cannot be repaid." Ethan bowed his head, but Alara smiled, knowing the truest reward was not gold or title, but a home brought back from ruin, and the peace that had finally returned to the hearts of her people. And so the sun rose over Elendria once more, brighter than it had in a long time, shining on a queen restored, a daughter returned, and a humble blacksmith whose courage had changed the fate of a kingdom.